Elena didn't know that the man sitting alone in the corner booth of the diner was Adrian Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She didn't know he'd been coming here every Tuesday for 3 months just to watch her serve coffee and smile, despite the bruises on her wrists. And she certainly didn't know that when she finally worked up the courage to ask him for help, she'd be sealing both their fates. The wedding invitation lay crumpled on the counter beside the register, cream-coloured paper that had cost more than Elena made in a week. Marcus's handwriting sprawled across the back in that familiar scrawl that used to make her heart race. Now it just made her stomach turn. "Hope you can find someone to bring," the note read. "Wouldn't want you to look pathetic showing up alone again." Eleanor's hands shook as she smoothed the invitation flat. 3 years. 3 years since she'd finally found the courage to leave Marcus, and he was still finding ways to cut her down. The worst part was that he was right. She would look pathetic showing up alone. She looked pathetic most days, working double shifts at Murphy's Diner just to afford the tiny studio apartment that leaked when it rained. "You okay, sweetheart?" Elena jumped, nearly knocking over the coffee pot. Mrs. Chen, the regular from table 6, was watching her with concerned eyes. The diner was nearly empty now, just past the dinner rush on a Tuesday evening. Only a handful of customers remained, including the man in the corner booth who never ordered anything but black coffee and always left a $20 tip on a $3 check. "I'm fine," Elena managed, forcing that practiced smile that had gotten her through 3 years of rebuilding her life from nothing. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine. Marcus was getting married to some socialite whose father owned half of downtown, and he wanted Elena there to witness it. Wanted her to see everything she'd given up when she'd walked away from his money, his connections, his promises that always came with conditions. "You're worthless without me," he'd told her the night she'd finally packed her things. "Nobody else will ever want you. You'll come crawling back." She hadn't, but God, some days it felt like he was right about the rest. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Chen left, pressing Elena's hand on her way out. "Take care of yourself, dear." Elena nodded, but her attention was drawn to the corner booth. The man was watching her again with those impossibly silver eyes that seemed to see too much. He'd been coming in for months now, always on Tuesdays, always alone. He was beautiful in a way that made her throat dry. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and a mouth that suggested he knew secrets she couldn't imagine. More than that, though, he was safe. There was something about the way he sat, perfectly still and perfectly aware, that made her think of predators, but predators who protected rather than hunted. She'd learned the difference the hard way. The invitation crinkled under her fingers as she gathered the courage she'd been building for months. He was well-dressed, expensive suit that probably cost more than her rent. Successful, attractive. And for some reason he kept coming back here, kept watching her with those storm-coloured eyes, like he was waiting for something. Maybe he was waiting for her to be brave. Elena untied her apron with trembling fingers and walked across the diner on unsteady legs. The man looked up as she approached, and something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something she didn't understand. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, then stopped. His eyes were even more intense up close. Silver shot through with gold like winter sunlight on ice. "I know this is crazy, and you don't know me, but I know you." His voice was deeper than she'd expected, rough like whiskey and smoke. It sent warmth shooting up her spine, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. "You do? You're Elena. You've been serving me coffee for 3 months. You take care of everyone who walks through that door, even when they don't deserve it. You smile even when your eyes are sad." He leaned forward slightly, and she caught the scent of something wild and clean, like mountain air after a storm. "What do you need?" The simple question nearly undid her. When was the last time someone had asked her what she needed instead of telling her what she should want? "I need a +1 for a wedding this Saturday," she said in a rush, the words tumbling over themselves. "Just pretend to be my boyfriend for a few hours. I can pay you, not much, but whatever I have." What's his name? Who? The man who hurt you. Elena's breath caught. How could he possibly know? She'd gotten good at hiding the bruises, even better at hiding the damage that went deeper than skin. I don't know what you... Your wrists, he said quietly, and his eyes dropped to where her sleeves had ridden up, revealing the faded marks that makeup couldn't quite cover. You flinch when people move too fast. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. His gaze met hers again, and there was something dangerous burning behind all that silver. What's his name? Marcus, she whispered, and saying it felt like lancing a wound. Marcus Ashford. It's his wedding. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena could have sworn she saw his eyes flash with something that wasn't entirely human. I'll be more than a +1. What? He stood then, and Elena had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than his perfectly tailored suit suggested, and he moved with a fluid grace that made her think of dangerous things. Adrian Blackwood, may I? He said, extending a hand, and I don't pretend anything. Eleanor stared at his hand for a heartbeat too long. There was something about him, something that made every instinct she'd developed over the past 3 years scream in warning, but not the kind of warning that said run, the kind that said this man could destroy you, but he won't. She placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the world tilted. Heat shot up her arm, spreading through her chest, settling in that hollow space behind her ribs that had been empty for so long she'd forgotten it existed. It was like being struck by lightning, like coming alive after years of sleepwalking. Adrian's fingers tightened around hers, and something in his expression shifted. His pupils dilated, and that silver-gold gaze dropped to her mouth before snapping back to her eyes. "What was that?" Elena breathed. "The beginning," Adrian said, and his thumb traced across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. "When is this wedding?" "Saturday, 3 o'clock. She should pull her hand away. She should step back, thank him politely, and pretend this moment had never happened. Instead, she found herself moving closer. "You don't understand. Marcus, he comes from money, important family. Everyone there will be—" "Looking at you." Adrian's free hand came up to cup her cheek, and Elena's breath hitched. Let them look. Let them see what he was too blind to value. Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, despite every warning her mind was screaming. When was the last time someone had touched her like this, like she was precious instead of breakable? "Why?" she asked, opening her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening. "Why are you helping me?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing the arch of her cheekbone. "Because," he said finally, "some bastards need to learn that what they throw away, other men will treasure." The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and her balance. Elena swayed on her feet, and Adrian's arm came around her waist, steadying her against his chest. "Easy," he murmured, and she could feel the rumble of his voice through his shirt. "I've got you." And impossibly, dangerously, Elena believed him. "See Saturday," she repeated, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. 3 o'clock, the Ashford estate. "I'll pick you up at 2. Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out a card, pressing it into her palm. "Text me your address." Eleanor looked down at the card, heavy cardstock, embossed letters that simply read Adrian Blackwood and a phone number. No company name, no title. Just his name in elegant script that probably cost more to print than she made in a day. "Adrian," she said, testing the name on her tongue. It fit him, strong and slightly dangerous. "Elena." The way he said her name made it sound like a prayer. "Whatever happens Saturday, whatever he says or does, remember this: you are not worthless. You never were." Elena's throat closed with unshed tears. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Adrian's hand squeezed hers once more before he let her go. He left a $50 bill on the table beside his untouched coffee and walked out into the night, leaving Elena standing in the middle of the empty diner with her heart racing and her world fundamentally changed. She looked down at the card in her hand, then at the crumpled wedding invitation on the counter. For the first time in 3 years, Saturday didn't fill her with dread. It filled her with something far more dangerous: hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind of impossible things. Elena stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of Delacroix Boutique, watching a stranger look back at her. The woman in the mirror wore a midnight blue gown that moved like liquid silk, cut to emphasize curves Eleanor had forgotten she possessed. The price tag had made her physically ill before Adrian had quietly removed it and handed it to the hovering saleswoman. "Mr. Blackwood," the woman had breathed, practically curtsying. "We're honoured to serve you again. The usual arrangements?" "Charge everything to the estate account," Adrian had said, his hand settling possessively on the small of Elena's back. "And have the alterations completed by tomorrow evening. Estate account." Elena filed that away with all the other fragments that didn't quite fit together, like the way the doorman at the boutique had opened the doors before Adrian even approached, like the phone calls he took in rapid-fire conversations about territory acquisitions and pack dynamics, like the way everyone they encountered seemed to hold their breath until he gave them permission to speak. "You don't have to do this," Elena said for the 10th time, smoothing her hands down the silk that probably cost more than her rent. "The dress I have at home is fine." "No." Adrian's voice brooked no argument. He stood behind her in the mirror, tall and commanding in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and his eyes met hers in the reflection. "You deserve beautiful things, Elena." The way he said it, like it was a fundamental truth rather than an opinion, made something crack open in her chest. When his thumb traced along her bare shoulder, that golden warmth spread through her again, settling low in her belly like honey and fire. "Why?" she whispered, watching his face in the mirror. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Because," he said finally, "someone should have been giving you beautiful things all along." Eleanor's breath caught. In the mirror, she could see the exact moment her carefully constructed walls began to crumble. Adrian saw it too, because his grip on her shoulders tightened protectively. "We'll take the dress," he told the saleswoman without breaking eye contact with Elena, "and shoes, jewellery, whatever she needs." The next hour passed in a blur of luxury Elena had only ever seen in magazines. Adrian chose everything with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, but he watched her face for approval with each selection. When she hesitated over a pair of diamond earrings that caught the light like captured stars, he leaned down to murmur in her ear, "They're not even real diamonds. Compared to how you'll outshine everyone in that room, these are nothing." Eleanor turned in his arms, close enough to catch that wild, clean scent that seemed to cling to his skin. "Adrian, trust me." 2 words, simple request. But Eleanor found herself nodding, found herself letting this beautiful, dangerous man dress her like a queen, while she still didn't understand who he really was. At the jewellery counter, the elderly salesman's hands shook slightly as he unlocked the display case. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, about the Northern Territory contracts your people mentioned—" "Not here, Davidson." Adrian's voice carried a quiet authority that made the man step back immediately. "We'll discuss business later." But Elena caught the words, Northern Territory, pack, business that made grown men nervous. She tucked each detail away, building a picture she wasn't sure she wanted to complete. "What do you do for work?" she asked as Adrian helped her into his car, a sleek black sedan that had probably cost more than most people's houses. "I manage territories," Adrian said carefully, starting the engine with a purr that spoke of serious horsepower. "Acquisitions, negotiations, making sure everyone understands the rules." "That's vague." Adrian's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "I'm a private man." Elena studied his profile as he drove through the city with the easy confidence of someone who owned it. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, and those incredible silver eyes that seemed to see everything. There were small scars along his hands, faded but violent, and when he shifted gears, his movements were too fluid, too controlled. "Are you in the military?" she asked. "Was. Long time ago." "What branch?" "Classified." Elena huffed out a laugh. "You're impossible." "I'm careful." Adrian glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. "There are people who would use information about me to hurt the people I care about." The people I care about. The casual way he included her in that circle made her heart skip beats. They ended up at Celestial, a restaurant Eleanor had only ever seen from the outside. The kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance and the waitstaff wore better suits than she owned, but Adrian walked in like he belonged there, and the maitre d' practically fell over himself to escort them to a private booth in the back. "The usual, Mr. Blackwood. Please, and bring your best vintage for the lady." Elena waited until they were alone before leaning across the table. "The usual? How often do you come here?" "Often enough." Adrian poured water into her glass with movements that were too precise, too controlled. "Tell me about Marcus." "I don't want to talk about Marcus." "You need to." Adrian's voice was gentle but implacable. "If I'm walking into his territory, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Territory. Another word that seemed to carry more weight than it should. Elena twisted her napkin in her hands, the expensive linen wrinkled between her fingers. "He was charming at first. Flowers, expensive dinners, weekend trips to his family's estate made me feel like a princess." Her voice cracked slightly. "I should have known it was too good to be true." "What changed?" "I did. Or rather, I stopped pretending to be what he wanted." Eleanor forced herself to meet Adrian's eyes. "Marcus likes his women decorative, quiet, grateful for his attention. When I started having opinions about things, when I wanted to work instead of just being his trophy girlfriend." "He hurt you?" Not a question. Adrian's voice had dropped into a register that made the hair on Elena's arms stand up. "Not at first, just words, telling me I was lucky he put up with me, that no one else would want someone so needy, so ordinary." Elena's hands were shaking now. Then it escalated. "He never hit my face, nothing that would show, always had excuses. I was clumsy, accident-prone." Adrian's hands clenched into fists on the table. When Elena looked up, his eyes were blazing with something that definitely wasn't human. For just a moment she could have sworn she saw his pupils dilate into something too predatory for comfort. "He touched you." The words came out like a growl. "Adrian? Did he force you?" "No." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "He didn't have to. He was so good at making me believe I deserved it, that I was lucky someone like him would even—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The silence that followed was so charged with tension, Eleanor could feel it crawling across her skin. When she finally looked up, Adrian was staring at her with an intensity that should have been frightening. "You didn't deserve any of that," he said quietly. "Not 1 second of it." "How can you be so sure? You don't even know me." "I know enough." Adrian reached across the table and covered her hands with his. The moment their skin touched, that golden thread sensation blazed to life again, stronger than before. "I know you work double shifts to support yourself because you'd rather struggle alone than depend on anyone else. I know you remember how every customer takes their coffee because you care about details that don't matter to anyone but you. I know you smile even when you're hurting because you think other people's comfort is more important than your own pain." Elena stared at him, something dangerous unfurling in her chest. "You've been watching me." "Guilty. Why?" Adrian was quiet for so long, Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like confession. "Because from the moment I walked into that diner, I couldn't look away. Because you're beautiful when you think no one's watching, when you let your guard down for just a moment. Because you're strong in ways you don't even realise, and every Tuesday I told myself I was just getting coffee. But really, I was trying to work up the courage to talk to you. Courage? Elena laughed shakily. You're the most confident man I've ever met. Not with you. Adrian's thumb traced across her knuckles, and Elena's breath hitched. Never with you. The waiter appeared with their dinner, but Elena barely tasted the exquisite food. All her attention was focused on the man across from her, on the way he moved like a predator trying to appear harmless, on the careful way he spoke like he was choosing each word to reveal as little as possible. What aren't you telling me? She asked as they shared dessert that tasted like chocolate and sin. Many things. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her with those impossible silver eyes. Some secrets are dangerous, Elena, the kind that put people at risk. People like me. Especially people like you. Elena set down her spoon, frustration and something deeper coiling in her stomach. So you get to know everything about me, but I'm supposed to just trust blindly? For now. Adrian's voice was gentle, but firm. Can you do that? Can you trust me until Saturday? Elena stared at him across the candle-lit table, this beautiful, mysterious man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she'd been too afraid to voice. Everything about him should have been a red flag. The evasive answers, the obvious wealth, the way people treated him like he owned the world. But when he looked at her like she was precious, when he touched her like she might break, when he spoke about her like she was something worth protecting instead of something that needed to be fixed. Yes, she whispered, and watched something fierce and possessive flicker across his features. Good. Adrian signalled for the check, but his eyes never left her face. Because after Saturday, after we handle Marcus and his little power games, I'm going to tell you everything. And then you're going to have to decide if you can handle who I really am. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What if I can't? Adrian stood and helped her from her chair, his hand lingering on her waist as he pulled her close. Then I'll wait until you can, he murmured against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. However long it takes, Elena. I'll wait. Outside the restaurant, Adrian walked her to his car with his hand on the small of her back, possessive and protective. Elena was acutely aware of how people moved out of their way on the sidewalk, how conversations stopped when Adrian passed by. "Who are you?" she asked as he opened the passenger door for her. Adrian paused, one hand on the doorframe, and Elena caught a glimpse of something wild and dangerous in his expression before he carefully masked it. "Saturday," he said simply. "Trust me until Saturday." Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more real. Elena stood before her bathroom mirror, hands trembling as she applied the last touches of makeup to cover the sleepless shadows under her eyes. The midnight blue gown hung perfectly, transforming her into someone she barely recognised, someone who looked like she belonged at the Ashford estate instead of serving coffee to people who did. The diamond earrings caught the light as she turned her head, and for a moment she could almost believe Adrian's words, that she was beautiful, that she deserved this. A knock at her apartment door sent her heart racing. 2:00 exactly. Elena had learned that Adrian was a man who kept his promises. She opened the door to find him waiting in the hallway, devastating in a charcoal grey suit that had definitely been tailored for his body. But it was the way he looked at her that stole her breath, like she was something miraculous he'd been waiting his whole life to see. Elena. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You're stunning." Heat flooded her cheeks as Adrian stepped closer, his presence filling the small space of her doorway. When he reached up to trace the line of her jaw with gentle fingers, that golden warmth blazed to life in her chest again. "Ready?" he asked softly. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. as ready as she'd ever be to face Marcus and his new wife and everyone who'd watched her humiliation 3 years ago. The drive to the Ashford estate passed in a blur of landscaped gardens and ostentatious wealth. Adrian's hand rested on her thigh, thumb tracing soothing circles through the silk of her dress, and Eleanor found herself focusing on that simple touch instead of the growing knot in her stomach. "Remember," Adrian said as they pulled through the iron gates, "you belong here as much as anyone else, more than most." Eleanor squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his absolute certainty. What if? No what ifs. Adrian brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a soft kiss that sent electricity racing up her arm. "You're with me now. That changes everything." The Ashford estate sprawled across manicured grounds, like something from a fairy tale, all white columns and sweeping staircases. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, and elegantly dressed guests moved across the lawn like exotic birds. Elena's chest tightened with familiar panic. "I can't do this," she whispered as Adrian came around to open her door. "Look at this place. Look at these people. I don't belong." "You belong anywhere I am." Adrian's voice carried such conviction that Elena found herself believing him. He helped her from the car, his hand settling possessively on her waist. "And I belong wherever you are." They moved toward the entrance together, and Elena was acutely aware of the way conversations paused as they passed. Women's eyes tracked Adrian with barely concealed hunger, while men straightened unconsciously, recognition and wariness flickering across their faces. "Mr. Blackwood." The doorman's voice held careful respect. "Welcome to the Ashford estate." "Thank you." Adrian's response was cordial but distant, the tone of a man accustomed to deference. Inside, the reception was already in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashford ancestors. Elena recognised faces from her past. Marcus's friends, his family, people who'd treated her like an amusing novelty when she'd been on his arm. "Elena?" The voice made Elena's blood turn to ice. She turned slowly to find Catherine Ashford approaching, Marcus's mother, resplendent in navy silk and pearls. The woman's smile was sharp as a blade. "Elena, dear, still playing dress-up in clothes you can't afford?" The familiar shame crashed over Elena like a wave, that old voice in her head agreeing, "You don't belong here, you never did." But before the spiral could drag her under, Adrian's hand tightened on her waist, anchoring her. "Mrs. Ashford." Adrian's voice was polite, but held an undercurrent of steel. "I don't believe we've met. Adrian Blackwood?" Catherine's eyes widened slightly at the name, recognition and something like alarm flickering across her features. "Blackwood, of the Northern Territory acquisitions?" "Among other things." Elena felt the shift in the air around them, the way other guests began to gravitate toward their conversation. Adrian's name carried weight she didn't understand, but she could see it in the sudden attention, the barely concealed interest. "How lovely!" Catherine's smile became strained. "I didn't realise Elena moved in such elevated circles these days." "Elena moves in whatever circles she chooses," Adrian replied smoothly. "She has that effect on people, makes them want to elevate themselves." The compliment hit Elena like a physical touch, warm and affirming. Catherine's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly before she excused herself with forced politeness. "Northern Territory acquisitions?" Elena asked, as they moved toward the cocktail area. "Later," Adrian murmured, but his hand on her back was possessive, protective. "Let's find your ex-boyfriend." They didn't have to look far. Marcus was holding court near the bar, handsome in the bland, privileged way Eleanor had once thought she wanted. His new bride clung to his arm like a beautiful accessory, blonde, perfect, and young enough to still believe his promises. Marcus saw them approaching, and his face went through a fascinating series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and then something ugly and possessive that made Elena's skin crawl. "Well, well," Marcus detached himself from his circle of admirers, approaching with the confident swagger Elena remembered too well. "Elena, you actually came." "Marcus?" Elena was proud that her voice came out steady. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Marcus's eyes raked over her dress, her jewellery, before settling on Adrian with barely concealed hostility. "And you brought a date. How unexpected." "Adrian Blackwood." Adrian stepped slightly forward, not quite putting himself between Elena and Marcus, but making his protective stance clear. When he offered his hand, Marcus was forced to take it, or appear rude in front of his guests. Elena watched Marcus's face go pale as Adrian's grip tightened. Whatever was happening in that handshake was more than social pleasantries. "Blackwood," Marcus repeated, trying to pull his hand free. "Should I know that name?" "That depends." Adrian's smile was sharp as winter frost. "How closely do you follow territorial acquisitions?" My family has interests in development." "I know." Adrian finally released Marcus's hand, and Eleanor noticed the way Marcus flexed his fingers like they'd gone numb. "Small interests, easily rearranged." The threat in those words was so subtle Eleanor almost missed it, but Marcus heard it clearly. His jaw tightened, and that familiar cruel glint entered his eyes. "Excuse me." Marcus turned to Eleanor with the condescending smile she remembered too well. "Could I borrow my ex-girlfriend for a moment? Catch up on old times?" "No." The word came out before Eleanor could stop it, stronger than she'd felt in years. "We have nothing to catch up on." Marcus's smile faltered. "Eleanor, sweetheart, don't be rude. We have history." "We have nothing." Eleanor lifted her chin, something fierce and unfamiliar uncurling in her chest. "You made sure of that when you spent 2 years trying to convince me I was worthless." "Now that's not fair." "Fair?" Eleanor's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby guests. "Was it fair when you told me no one else would ever want me? When you made me believe I was lucky you put up with my neediness? When you—" "That's enough." Marcus's mask slipped completely, revealing the cruel man beneath. "You're making a scene, Elena, just like always, desperate for attention. Even at someone else's wedding!" The words hit their target, that old shame flooding through Elena's system. But before she could fold, before she could apologize and shrink back into herself, Adrian moved. He was suddenly there, not touching Marcus, but radiating such menace that the other man actually stepped backward. When Adrian spoke, his voice carried across the immediate area, drawing every eye. "Apologize." "Excuse me." "You heard me." Adrian's presence seemed to fill the space around them, commanding and absolute. "Apologize to Eleanor, now." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "For what? Telling the truth? Eleanor knows what she is, don't you, sweetheart? Still the same damaged goods I left behind." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see if she'd crumble the way she always had before. The old Elena would have mumbled an apology and disappeared into the crowd. But she wasn't the old Elena anymore. She was wearing a dress that cost more than her rent, jewellery that caught the light like captured stars, and standing beside a man who looked at her like she was precious instead of broken. "I know what I am," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying in the sudden hush. "I'm someone who survived you, someone who rebuilt her life from nothing because leaving you was worth starting over with nothing." She stepped closer to Adrian, felt his hand settle on her waist like a promise. "I'm someone who deserves better than you ever gave me, and I'm someone who found it." Marcus's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You think this is real? You think he actually wants you? Look around, Elena. Look where you are. You're still the same pathetic little waitress." He never got to finish the sentence. Adrian moved faster than Elena could track, suddenly close enough to Marcus that the other man stumbled backward in alarm. When Adrian spoke, his voice was deadly quiet, but somehow carried to every corner of the reception. "You're right about one thing," Adrian said, his silver eyes blazing with something that definitely wasn't human. Elena is exactly what she's always been, brave, kind, stronger than anyone who's tried to break her. His gaze swept the watching crowd before returning to Marcus. The difference is, now she has someone who recognizes her worth. Adrian turned slightly, including Elena in his protective circle, his arms sliding around her waist. Elena is extraordinary, she always was. You were just too small to see it. The crowd murmured appreciatively, several people nodding in agreement. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, not from shame this time, but from something dangerously close to joy. Marcus's face had gone from red to white, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know her like I do." "Thank God for that." Adrian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "If I knew her the way you did, I might have made the same mistake of not appreciating her." He leaned down to brush a soft kiss against Elena's temple, and she melted into his warmth, into the solid strength of his body against hers. "Enjoy your wedding, Marcus," Adrian said without looking away from Elena. "We have better things to do." As they turned to walk away, Elena heard Marcus's voice behind them, sharp with desperate cruelty. "You'll regret this, Elena. He'll leave you just like everyone else. You're nothing." Elena didn't turn around. She didn't flinch. She walked away on Adrian's arm, with her head held high, leaving Marcus and his poison behind. "Are you okay?" Adrian asked softly as they moved toward the garden doors. Elena looked up at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd just publicly claimed her in front of everyone who'd ever made her feel small. "I'm better than okay," she whispered. "I'm free." Adrian's eyes darkened with something fierce and possessive. "Good," he murmured, guiding her onto the moonlit terrace. "Because we're just getting started." He backed her gently against the stone railing, his hands framing her face as he studied her in the silver light. "Elena," he said softly, "you were magnificent in there." "I was terrified." "You were brave. There's a difference." Adrian's thumb traced across her lower lip, and Elena's breath hitched. "You stood up for yourself. You chose your own worth over his opinion." "I chose you," Elena whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, something raw and hungry that made her pulse race. "Elena," he breathed, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like their first tentative touch. This was claiming, desperate, full of months of careful restraint, finally breaking free. Elena's hands fisted in Adrian's jacket as he pressed her back against the railing, his body sheltering her from the world as his mouth moved against hers with devastating skill. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "You have no idea what you do to me," he murmured, his voice rough with want. Elena smiled up at him, feeling more alive than she had in years. "Show me," she whispered. Adrian's answering smile was full of dark promise. "With pleasure." Elena woke slowly, consciousness filtering through layers of silk and warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous evening crashed back. Marcus's wedding, Adrian's fierce protection, that devastating kiss on the moonlit terrace that had left her dizzy and desperate for more. She was in Adrian's bed, alone. Elena sat up carefully, clutching the sheet to her chest as she took in her surroundings. The bedroom was massive, all dark wood and masculine lines, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Her midnight blue gown lay draped over a chair, and she was wearing one of Adrian's shirts, white cotton that smelled like that wild, clean scent that seemed to cling to his skin. "You're awake." Elena turned toward the voice and found Adrian standing in the doorway, holding a tray that smelled like coffee and heaven. He'd changed from his wedding attire into dark jeans and a grey sweater that did sinful things to his shoulders, but it was his eyes that made her breath catch. There was something different about them this morning, something wild and barely leashed that sent heat racing down her spine. "I brought you breakfast," he said, moving into the room with that fluid grace that had always seemed slightly inhuman. "You should eat something before—" "Before what?" Elena interrupted, pulling his shirt tighter around herself. "Adrian, I need to know what's happening. This apartment, the way people treat you, the things you said to Marcus about territorial acquisitions." She took a shaky breath. "What are you?" Adrian set the tray on the nightstand and perched on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. But Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from him, coiled energy that made the air between them electric. "Elena, don't!" She held up a hand, surprising herself with her own firmness. "Don't give me another evasive answer. Don't tell me to wait. I'm tired of not knowing who I'm—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Who you're what?" Adrian's voice was gentle, but his eyes were blazing silver. "Who I'm falling in love with," Elena whispered, and watched something fierce and possessive flicker across his features. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Show me," Elena said before he could start another careful explanation. "Whatever you are, whoever you are, just show me." Adrian's hands clenched into fists in his lap. "You might run." "I might," Elena agreed, "but I'm tired of being afraid, and I'm tired of secrets." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, resignation mixing with something that looked like relief. He stood slowly, moved to the centre of the room where the morning light caught him like a spotlight. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories," he said quietly. "I lead the largest wolf-shifter pack on the continent." Elena's breath caught, but she didn't move. "Wolf-shifter?" "Yes." Adrian's eyes began to change, silver bleeding into something more metallic, more predatory. "The pull you feel between us, the golden thread, it's real, Elena. You're my mate." "Your mate." Elena repeated the words slowly, testing them on her tongue. As in fated, destined, the other half of my soul." Adrian's voice carried such conviction that Elena found herself believing him, despite the impossibility of it all. "But I'm human. Doesn't matter. The bond chose us." Adrian took a step closer, and Elena could swear she saw his pupils dilate into something distinctly non-human. "It's why you feel safe with me, despite every instinct telling you I'm dangerous. It's why touching you feels like coming home." Elena pressed her hand to her chest, to that constant warm ache that had been there since the moment she touched his hand. The golden thread. Our bond. Adrian moved closer, slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal. "Eleanor, I know this is insane. I know werewolves aren't supposed to be real, but you asked for the truth." Elena stared at him, this beautiful, impossible man who'd walked into her life and turned everything upside down. She should be terrified. Should be running for the door, screaming about delusions and impossibilities. Instead, she found herself standing, Adrian's shirt falling to mid-thigh as she moved toward him. "Show me," she said again, her voice stronger now. "If we're really mates, if this bond is real, show me what you really are." Adrian's eyes flashed pure silver, and Eleanor felt something electric race down her spine. "Eleanor, I'm not running." She reached out to touch his face, felt the sharp intake of his breath as her fingers traced his cheekbone. "Show me." Adrian closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were completely silver, inhuman and beautiful. His features sharpened, became more predatory, and when he smiled, Elena caught a glimpse of teeth that were definitely not entirely human. "You're beautiful," she whispered, and watched shock flicker across his transformed features. "You're not afraid." "I should be." Elena moved closer, drawn by something deeper than logic. "But I'm not. You're still you, still the man who's been protecting me, caring for me." Adrian's hands came up to frame her face, and Elena leaned into his touch. Elena, there's more. Dangers. Enemies who would hurt you to get to me. Being my mate makes you a target. Then protect me. Elena's words surprised them both. Isn't that what alphas do? Protect their mates? Something raw and desperate flashed across Adrian's face. You're accepting this, accepting me. I'm accepting us. Elena rose on her toes to brush her lips against his. Whatever that means. Adrian's control snapped. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest as he claimed her mouth in a kiss that was pure possession. Eleanor could taste the wildness on his lips, feel the barely leashed power in the way he held her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said roughly. I've loved you since the first moment I saw you, even before I understood what you were to me. I love you too. The admission came easily, naturally, like something that had always been true. So what happens now? Now, Adrian said, his arms tightening around her. I introduce you to my pack. I teach you about our world, and I spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. Elena smiled up at him, feeling more certain than she had about anything in years. I could never regret choosing you. She was reaching up to kiss him again when the windows exploded. Glass showered the room as three massive shapes crashed through the reinforced windows, moving too fast to be human. Elena screamed, more from shock than fear, and found herself suddenly behind Adrian as he moved to shield her. "Rogues!" Adrian snarled, and his voice carried a supernatural authority that made the hair on Eleanor's arms stand up. "In my territory." The three intruders shifted as Elena watched, their forms blurring and changing until three massive wolves stood in the ruins of Adrian's bedroom. Their eyes glowed red with madness, and their lips were pulled back to reveal teeth designed for killing. "The Alpha King's little human mate," one of them said, his voice a gravelly approximation of speech. "Marcus sends his regards." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Marcus did this?" "Your ex-boyfriend discovered some interesting family connections," Adrian said, without taking his eyes off the rogues. His voice was deadly calm, but Elena could feel the fury radiating from him in waves. "Turns out his cousin is part of a rogue pack, one that's been looking for leverage against me." "We're going to enjoy this," the largest rogue said, his red eyes fixed on Elena. "The Alpha King's mate will make excellent bait." Adrian's laugh was nothing like human sound. When Elena glanced at him, his eyes were blazing silver, and his features had shifted into something beautifully, terrifyingly predatory. "You made a mistake coming here," Adrian said, power rolling off him in waves that made the rogues step back despite themselves. "But you made a bigger mistake threatening her." The rogues attacked as one, moving faster than Elena's human eyes could track. But Adrian moved faster, meeting them halfway with a roar that shattered what remained of the windows. Elena pressed herself against the wall, watching in terror and awe as Adrian fought three supernatural predators with the deadly grace of something born to kill. But there were three of them, and even an Alpha King could be overwhelmed. Elena watched in horror as claws raked across Adrian's back, painting the white walls with crimson. One of the rogues broke free from the melee, turning toward Elena with hunger in his red eyes. "Adrian!" Elena screamed as the rogue lunged for her. Time slowed to a crawl. Elena could see her death coming, could see the extended claws that would tear through her human flesh like paper. She closed her eyes, bracing for impact. Instead, she felt Adrian's body slam into hers, knocking her aside as he took the claws meant for her across his chest. His blood splashed hot and red across her skin as he went down hard. "No!" Elena was moving before conscious thought kicked in, throwing herself between Adrian and the rogues. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare die for me!" Her hands pressed against the wounds on Adrian's chest, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. Around them, the remaining rogues circled like vultures, but Elena didn't care. All she could see was Adrian's pale face. All she could feel was his blood soaking through her fingers. "Don't you dare leave me," she sobbed, pressing harder against the wounds. "I just found you. I just chose you. Don't you dare—" Adrian's eyes opened, found hers. "Never," he whispered, his voice rough with pain, but absolutely certain. "I'll never leave you." The golden thread between them blazed to life, stronger than it had ever been. Elena felt it snap taut, felt something fundamental shift in the very fabric of her being as their bond completed itself. Power flooded through her, not human power, but something deeper, more primal. The rogues felt it too. They stepped back, whimpering, as energy rolled off Elena in waves. "Impossible," one of them breathed. "She's human." "Not any more," Adrian said, sitting up with Elena's help. His wounds were already healing, the deep gashes knitting themselves closed with supernatural speed. "She's my mate, my Luna, and you just threatened the Alpha Queen." Eleanor looked down at her hands, still stained with Adrian's blood, and felt something wild and powerful stirring in her chest. When she looked up at the cowering rogues, her eyes blazed with golden light. "Get out," she said quietly, and her voice carried an authority she'd never possessed. "Get out of my territory, now." The rogues fled, crashing through the ruined windows in their haste to escape. Elena watched them go, then turned back to Adrian, who was staring at her with wonder and fierce pride. "What just happened to me?" she whispered. "You accepted the bond completely," Adrian said, pulling her into his arms. "You chose me over everything else, even your own safety." The mate bond responded. "I'm not human anymore." "You're still human," Adrian assured her, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "But you're also mine, my Luna, my queen, and I'll spend eternity making sure you never regret that choice." Eleanor melted into his embrace, feeling the golden thread between them humming with contentment. "Never," she whispered against his neck. "I could never regret choosing you." The weeks that followed were a strange rhythm of discovery and belonging that Elena had never imagined possible. Standing at the edge of the mountain clearing, Elena watched the massive lodge that served as pack headquarters emerge from the morning mist like something from a fairy tale. Ancient timber and modern glass blended seamlessly into the landscape, and she could sense the dozens of supernatural lives moving within its walls. 3 weeks ago, the idea of werewolves would have sent her running. Now she was about to meet an entire pack of them as their Luna. "Nervous?" Adrian asked, his hand settling possessively on the small of her back. "Terrified," Elena admitted, leaning into his warmth. "What if they don't accept me? What if I'm not strong enough to be their Luna?" Adrian turned her to face him, his silver eyes blazing with certainty. "Elena, you faced down 3 rogues without flinching. You chose to protect me even when you were still human. You think my pack won't see that strength?" Before Elena could respond, the massive front doors of the lodge opened, and a man emerged who could only be Adrian's second in command. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp green eyes, he moved with the same predatory grace that marked all the wolves she'd met. "Cameron," Adrian called as they approached. "How are the preparations?" "Complete." Cameron's voice carried the slight roughness that Elena had learned indicated a wolf close to the surface. His eyes studied her with careful assessment. Luna. The title still sent shivers down Elena's spine. "Cameron, it's nice to finally meet you." Something flickered in Cameron's expression. Approval, maybe. "The pack is assembled in the Great Hall," he told Adrian. "They're curious about your mate." "Of course they are." Adrian's hand tightened protectively on Elena's waist. "She's the first Luna we've had in 50 years. They entered the lodge together, and Elena's breath caught at the sheer scale of it. The great hall soared 3 stories high, with massive timber beams and a stone fireplace that could have housed a small apartment. But it was the people that made her knees weak. Dozens of them, all impossibly beautiful in that supernatural way, all turning to stare as Adrian led her into the room. Elena felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, pressing against her skin. "Pack!" Adrian's voice carried across the hall, commanding instant silence. "You're Luna." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every person in the room bowed their heads in unison, a show of respect that made Eleanor's heart race with equal parts panic and wonder. "Rise," she heard herself say, the word carrying more authority than her human voice had ever possessed. "Please, all of you, rise." They did, and Eleanor found herself looking into dozens of faces that ranged from curious to hopeful to cautiously welcoming. An elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd, her silver hair braided with ribbons and her eyes the deep blue of mountain lakes. "I am Margaret," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of age and wisdom. "Elder of this pack, we welcome you, Luna Eleanor." "Thank you," Eleanor managed, acutely aware that this was some kind of test. "I'm honoured to be here." Margaret's eyes studied Eleanor with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "You carry power," the elder said slowly, "but not born power, changed power. How is this possible?" "The mating bond," Adrian explained, his arm sliding around Elena's waist in clear claiming behaviour. "It awakened her abilities when she chose to protect me over her own safety." Murmurs rippled through the assembled pack, voices carrying notes of amazement and approval. Margaret's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Awakened? Child, what bloodline do you carry?" "I don't know what you mean," Elena said honestly. "I'm human, was human." "May I?" Margaret extended her hands, and after a glance at Adrian, Elena nodded. The moment Margaret's fingers touched Elena's wrists, power flared between them. The elder's eyes went wide, then wider, and she stumbled backward like she'd been struck. "Impossible," Margaret breathed. "Child, you carry witch bloodlines, old bloodlines. How did you not know?" Elena's world tilted. "Witch?" "Your grandmother," Margaret said, her voice filled with wonder. "Did she ever speak of the old ways, of sensing things others couldn't?" Elena's memory flashed to her grandmother's garden, to the way plants seemed to bloom under her touch, to the strange teas that always seemed to heal whatever ailed you. She said she had green fingers, that plants responded to her. "More than green fingers," Margaret said softly. "Natural magic, and you, child, carry the strongest witch bloodlines I've ever encountered." She turned to Adrian with something like awe. "No wonder the bond is so strong. She's not just lunar material, she's a natural-born alpha queen." The hall erupted in excited whispers. Eleanor felt Adrian's arm tighten around her, anchoring her as the world shifted beneath her feet once again. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," Adrian said, his voice rough with pride and something deeper, "that you were born for this, born to stand beside me, to lead this pack. The bond didn't just choose randomly, Elena. It chose perfectly." Elena was still processing this revelation when Cameron approached, his expression grim. "Alpha," he said quietly, "we have a problem. Marcus Ashford is here, with allies." Adrian's eyes flashed dangerous silver. "Here? On Pack land?" "At the border, demanding to speak with you. He claims formal challenge rights through his cousin's Pack affiliation." Elena's blood turned to ice. "He can do that?" "Old Pack law," Adrian explained, his voice deadly quiet. "If he's been accepted into a pack, he can challenge for mate rights." His arm tightened around her. "He wants you back, Elena, and he's willing to fight me for you." The fury that blazed through Elena was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Power crackled along her skin, and she felt every pack member in the room respond to her emotional state. "Let him come," she said, her voice carrying supernatural authority that made several wolves step back in surprise. "Let him try to claim me." "Eleanor," Adrian started. "No." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes blazing with golden light. I spent 2 years believing his lies about my worth. I spent 3 years rebuilding myself from the pieces he left behind. If he wants to challenge for me, let him, but he's about to learn exactly what he threw away." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then smiled with fierce pride. "As you wish, my queen." The confrontation took place in the pack's traditional challenge circle, a ring of ancient stones that had witnessed countless battles over the centuries. Elena stood beside Adrian, wearing pack colours and Adrian's claiming mark, while Marcus approached with 3 other wolves Elena didn't recognise. Marcus looked different, still handsome in that privileged way, but there was something wild and desperate in his eyes now. When he saw Elena, his expression twisted with possessive hunger. "Elena," he called across the circle, "you look well. Playing dress-up again, I see." "I look like what I am," Elena replied calmly. "The Alpha Queen of the Northern Territories." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "Queen, you're a waitress, Elena. A nothing who got lucky enough to catch an alpha's attention for a few weeks." "She's my mate," Adrian said, stepping slightly forward. "Acknowledged by the moon, accepted by the pack, bonded by choice and blood. Your claim has no validity here." "Doesn't it?" Marcus's smile turned ugly. "I marked her first, years before you ever met her. Those bruises on her wrists, failed claiming marks. She belonged to me before she ever belonged to you." Elena's stomach churned with revulsion, but Adrian's fury was a living thing beside her. When he spoke, his voice carried the full authority of an alpha king. "You abused her, broke pack law by attempting to force a bond with an unwilling mate. Your marks were rejected because she was never yours to claim." "Prove it," Marcus snarled, and his form began to blur and shift. "Fight me for her, Alpha King. Winner takes the mate." "No," Elena said, stepping forward before Adrian could respond. Power rolled off her in waves, making the very air shimmer with energy. "You don't get to fight for me like I'm a prize to be won. I choose my own fate." She walked into the centre of the circle, facing Marcus with her chin raised and her eyes blazing gold. "You want to claim me? Try." Marcus shifted fully, becoming a rust-coloured wolf that was larger than Eleanor had expected, but still dwarfed by the supernatural authority radiating from her small human form. He circled her, lips pulled back to reveal fangs designed for killing. "You can't stop me this time," Marcus growled, his voice distorted by his wolf form. "No one to protect you now." "I don't need protection," Elena said calmly. "I need you to understand something." She raised her hand, and power exploded from her in a golden wave that sent Marcus tumbling backward. Every plant in the surrounding forest bloomed at once, flowers bursting into impossible colours as Eleanor's magic responded to her emotional state. "I was never yours," Eleanor continued, walking toward the stunned wolf with steady steps. "I never will be yours. And if you ever threaten me or my pack again, you'll discover exactly why natural-born alpha queens are so rare." Marcus scrambled to his feet, but Elena's power held him pinned. Around the circle, his allies whimpered and submitted to an authority older and stronger than pack hierarchy. "Leave!" Elena commanded, her voice carrying supernatural compulsion that made Marcus's knees buckle. "Take your allies and leave my territory. Never return." Marcus shifted back to human form, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. "This isn't over." "It is." Adrian stepped up beside Elena, his presence amplifying her power until the very stones of the circle hummed with energy. "She's made her choice. Honour it or face the consequences of threatening an alpha queen." Marcus and his allies fled without another word, crashing through the forest in their desperation to escape Eleanor's overwhelming presence. When they were gone, Eleanor swayed on her feet, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. Adrian caught her immediately, pulling her against his chest as the pack erupted in cheers and howls of approval. "You were magnificent," Adrian murmured against her hair. "Absolutely magnificent." Elena looked up at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd walked into her life and changed everything. "I love you," she said simply. "Whatever I am now, whoever I'm becoming, I love you." "And I love you," Adrian replied, his silver eyes blazing with pride and devotion. "My mate, my Luna, my queen." Around them, the pack celebrated their Alpha Queen's first victory. But Elena only had eyes for Adrian. Tomorrow they would face the challenges of ruling together. Tonight she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. 3 months later, Elena stood before the floor-length mirror in what had once been Adrian's bedroom, and was now undeniably theirs, adjusting the delicate silver circlet that marked her as Alpha Queen. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the broken waitress who desperately asked a stranger for help at a wedding. This woman stood tall, confident, radiating the quiet authority that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. "Second thoughts?" Adrian asked from the doorway, devastating in the formal black suit he wore for pack ceremonies. Eleanor turned to face him, the circlet catching the morning light. "Never," she said, and meant it completely. "Though I still can't quite believe this is real sometimes." "It's real." Adrian crossed the room with that fluid grace that had first caught her attention, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You're real. We're real." In the months since Marcus's defeat, Eleanor had discovered depths to herself she'd never imagined. Under Elder Margaret's guidance, she'd learned to control her newfound abilities, the way plants responded to her emotions, how she could sense the emotional states of pack members, the supernatural authority that could calm conflicts or boost healing with just a touch. She'd also learned the responsibilities that came with being Alpha Queen, and found herself surprisingly suited to leadership. "The Pack Council meeting yesterday went well," Elena said, straightening Adrian's already perfect tie just for the excuse to touch him. "The territory expansion proposal passed unanimously." "Because they trust your judgment," Adrian replied, catching her hands and bringing them to his lips. 3 months, and you've already accomplished more diplomatic progress than we've seen in years." "We've accomplished," Elena corrected. "We're partners in this, remember?" Adrian's smile was devastating. "How could I forget? You remind me every time I try to make a decision without consulting you first." Elena laughed, the sound bright and free in a way that still surprised her. "Because you're terrible at remembering you have a queen now, not just a mate. Speaking of which..." Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Eleanor's heart stop. "I know we're already mated. I know the bond makes us connected in ways deeper than any human ceremony could achieve. But you deserve a proposal, Elena, a choice made freely, without supernatural compulsion or life-threatening situations forcing the decision." He dropped to one knee right there in their bedroom, opening the box to reveal a ring that took Elena's breath away. It wasn't ostentatious, an elegant band of white gold set with a stone that seemed to capture light and hold it, throwing rainbow prisms across the walls. "This belonged to my grandmother," Adrian said, his silver eyes blazing with emotion. "The last Alpha Queen before you. She told me once that it would know its next owner, that it would only shine for a woman worthy of wearing it." He looked up at Elena with such love it made her chest ache. "It's been dull as stone for 50 years, Elena, but the moment I thought of you wearing it, it blazed like captured starlight." Elena's hands flew to cover her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks despite her effort to maintain composure. "Elena Rodriguez," Adrian continued, his voice rough with emotion, "you've been my salvation, my partner, my equal in everything that matters. You've made me a better man and a better leader. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife as well as my queen?" "Yes," Elena whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, and the moment it settled into place, it blazed with light that seemed to come from within the stone itself. Elena stared at it in wonder, then threw herself into Adrian's arms as he stood, kissing him with all the joy and love and certainty that filled her heart. "I love you," she murmured against his lips. "I love the life we've built, the future we're planning, the way you make me feel like I can be anything." "You can be anything," Adrian said fiercely. "You already are everything." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the sacred grove where pack ceremonies had been held for generations. Ancient trees formed a natural cathedral, their branches interwoven with lights and flowers that Elena had coaxed into blooming out of season with gentle encouragement of her magic. The entire pack attended, along with leaders from allied supernatural communities who'd come to witness the first Alpha King marriage in half a century. Elena walked down the flower-strewn path, wearing her grandmother's wedding dress, ivory lace that Elder Margaret had helped her alter with touches of pack tradition. Silver threads were woven through the bodice in patterns that told the story of their courtship, and Adrian's grandmother's jewellery caught the filtered sunlight like captured stars. But it was Adrian's face when he saw her that made her feel truly beautiful. The wonder and love and fierce possession in his silver eyes as she approached him at the altar made every step feel like coming home. "Dearly beloved," Elder Margaret began, her voice carrying easily through the grove, "we gather today to witness the joining of our Alpha King and his chosen queen, two souls who found each other across impossible odds and chose to build something extraordinary together." The ceremony blended human traditions with pack rituals in ways that honoured both parts of Elena's heritage. They exchanged rings and vows that spoke of partnership and equality, of shared leadership and eternal devotion. But when it came time for the supernatural elements, Elena felt the power of the moment settle into her bones. "Adrian Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying the authority of an alpha queen speaking before her pack. "I choose you as my mate, my king, my partner in all things. I bind my strength to yours, my life to yours, my heart to yours, for as long as the moon rises and the sun sets." "Elena Blackwood," Adrian replied, his voice resonating with supernatural power. "I choose you as my mate, my queen, my equal in all things. I pledge my protection, my devotion, my very soul to you, for as long as stars shine and wolves run beneath them." When they kissed to seal their vows, power exploded between them in a golden wave that strengthened every supernatural being in attendance. The bond between them blazed like sunlight, visible to every creature present, and the grove itself seemed to sing with joy. "I present to you," Elder Margaret called out as they turned to face their people, "Alpha King Adrian and Queen Eleanor Blackwood, united in bond and blood, chosen by fate and sealed by choice." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Pack members and allies danced beneath the stars while she and Adrian moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and blessings from creatures she was still learning to believe existed. "No regrets?" Adrian asked as they found a quiet moment together at the edge of the celebration. Elena looked around at the supernatural beings who'd become her people, at the man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, at the life they'd built together from nothing but faith and determination. "Only that I waited so long to ask for help," Elena said, echoing words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "If I'd been braver sooner, we might have found each other years ago." "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to," Adrian said, pulling her into his arms for a dance beneath the moonlight. "Some things are worth waiting for, Elena. Some things are worth fighting for." As they swayed together in the silver light, surrounded by their pack and their allies, Elena marvelled at the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate plea in a small-town diner to ruling supernatural territories together, it felt impossible and inevitable all at once. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked, sensing her contemplative mood through their bond. Everything," Elena said softly. "How scared I was that night at the diner. How sure I was that I wasn't worth anything. How impossible all of this would have seemed. And now," Elena smiled up at her husband, her mate, her king. "Now I know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. That real strength comes from accepting love, not rejecting it. That every ending really is a beginning if you're brave enough to see it. She leaned up to kiss him beneath the stars, tasting promise and forever on his lips. Around them, their pack celebrated long into the night, but Elena was already thinking ahead to tomorrow, to the challenges they would face together, to the supernatural territories they would govern as partners. "Ready for the rest of our lives, my queen?" Adrian murmured against her ear. "With you?" Elena smiled, her heart full of love and certainty and hope for the future. "I'm ready for anything." Later, much later, when the celebration had wound down and they'd retreated to their private chambers, Elena found herself standing at the window, looking out over the territory that was now truly home. Adrian came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist as he rested his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked simply. "Completely." Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. "You know, I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people, something I wasn't worthy of. And now? Now I know it's something you choose, something you build with someone who sees your worth even when you can't see it yourself." She turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for being patient, for waiting until I was ready to believe I deserved this." "I told you once I'd wait however long you needed," Adrian said, cupping her face in his hands. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. For you, Elena, I'd wait forever." Elena kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promises for all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them. Outside, their territory settled into peaceful sleep under the watchful protection of their alpha pair. Inside, Elena Blackwood, Alpha Queen of the Northern Territories, fell asleep in the arms of the man who'd taught her that she was worth fighting for. Where are you listening from tonight? Share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing from fellow believers in fated love and second chances. If you enjoyed Elena and Adrian's journey from that desperate request in a small-town diner to finding their forever together, subscribe for more supernatural romance stories. It's free and helps more people discover these tales of healing, hope, and the transformative power of love that sees us exactly as we are and chooses us anyway.